The first thing I noticed about her was that she did not look away. Most people who come before me in the throne room of Veldrath find something to study: the floor, the carved stone pillars, the banners that hang from the raftered ceiling like the memory of better days. Even the diplomats do it. Even the pack elders, men who have lived through wars and border raids and the long cold of the Veldrath winters, manage to find something interesting about their own boots when I fix them with a look. It is not a cruelty I practice deliberately. It is simply the weight a king accumulates, year by year, when he has stopped expecting to be surprised. She looked straight at me. She was 19, perhaps 20, standing at the center of the throne room floor in a traveling cloak that had seen better roads and a pair of boots that had clearly walked a great many of them. She was slender, brown-haired, and she had the kind of face that does not announce itself: quiet features, composed, the sort that most people would glance at and glance away from without a second thought. She held a stone in both hands, roughly the size of a man's fist, dark gray river granite with characters carved into its flat face. She held it the way people hold things they are afraid someone will take from them. My steward, Bren, had come to me in the small study where I handle the morning correspondence and told me, with the look of a man describing an inconvenience he has already attempted to resolve, that there was a girl at the gate, a commoner. No pack mark, no family seal, no letter of introduction from any house or hold. She had given her name as Senna. She had said she needed to speak to the king. She had said it, Bren added pointedly, with the kind of quiet persistence that is harder to remove than a locked door. I told him to bring her in. It was not generosity. It was that I had been sitting with the morning correspondence for 2 hours and had found nothing in it worth reading. That is what my life in Veldrath had become in the 19th year of my solo reign. Nothing worth reading, nothing that surprised me. I administered the kingdom the way a man maintains a machine he no longer expects to need, because it is there, because it runs, because the stopping of it would cost more than the continuing. I held councils. I signed trade agreements. I inspected the river bridges twice a year and the mile markers once. I kept Veldrath fed and governed and at peace with its neighbors. I did all of it with what my steward called efficiency, and what I privately understood to be the absence of any reason to do otherwise. I had not been surprised in 19 years. She looked straight at me, and something moved. Not much. A small thing, deep and quiet, in the place behind the breastbone where the Bond-Sense lives had lived once, where it had been silent for so long that I had stopped calling it silence and started calling it simply the way things were. A vibration, barely. The way a plucked string sounds in the next room, muffled by stone and distance, so faint you are not certain you heard it at all. I kept my face still. A king learns that before almost anything else. She waited until the sound of Bren's retreating footsteps had faded, and then she said, "Thank you for seeing me. I know you didn't have to." Her voice was low and clear, and had a particular quality to it that I could not immediately name, a steadiness that was not coldness and a directness that was not aggression. Simply, a person who had decided, before entering this room, exactly how they intended to be. I make a practice of seeing people who come to my gate without a letter of introduction, I said. It occasionally turns out to be instructive. Has it been instructive yet today? The mildness with which she said it, not impertinent, simply curious, almost made me smile. I did not. "Not yet," I said. "Tell me your name and your business." "My name is Senna. My business." She looked down at the stone in her hands for a moment and then back up at me. "My business is a question, one question. I've traveled 40 days to ask it. I'd like to ask it now if you'll allow me." 40 days. I studied her, the boots, the cloak, the worn edges of the traveling satchel at her side. She was not lying about the 40 days. The road from the eastern provinces to Veldrath's capital was 38 days at a good pace. She had walked most of it, by the look of her. "Ask," I said. She took a breath. "Where is my father?" The throne room was quiet. It is always quiet. I built the silence into it deliberately in the early years of my reign because I had found that silence made people honest. The stone arches hold sound away from the center of the floor, drawing it up into the raftered dark, and what is left is a clean stillness that most people find uncomfortable. She did not find it uncomfortable. She stood in it as if it were simply air. The thing behind my breastbone moved again. This time I could not attribute it to imagination. I had not felt the bond sense stir since the night Myra walked out onto the trade road east of the city and did not come back. 19 years ago. The night a search party went out at dawn and found her traveling cloak on the bank of the Veldt River and her traveling pack on the road and nothing else. The night I understood that the fated bond does not spare you anything. Not the grief, not the silence that follows, not the 19 years of mournings that come after, each one requiring you to rise and govern a kingdom you no longer have a particular reason to govern, except that other people need you to. I had put the bond sense away carefully, the way you put away things you cannot look at. I had not looked at it since. It was looking at me now. I said, "Where did you get that stone?" She glanced down at the granite in her hands. "My mother gave it to me, not directly she left it, when she died." "When did she die?" 19 years ago. A pause, small and precise. I was 3 months old. The silence in the throne room changed quality. I was aware of it the way you are aware of weather shifting, not a sound, not a movement, but a pressure that is different from the pressure that was there before. "What is your mother's name?" I said. "Myra," she said. Her name was Myra. I had thought for years that the name would always wound me if I heard it spoken aloud. I had said it myself, in the first years alone, at night, in the way that grief demands a person speak the names of the lost as though speaking keeps them present. I had eventually stopped. The name had become something I kept behind a closed door in my mind, the way you keep a room in a house where someone died sealed, not visited, but always there. She said it simply, the way you say the name of a person you never knew with care, because it mattered to you but without the weight of specific memory. She had not known Myra. She had been 3 months old. Everything she knew of her mother was second-hand. The name, the stone, the 40-day road she had traveled to follow the carving on it to the city of Veldrath. I kept my voice level. A king learns that before almost anything else, and I had had 19 years of practice. "Tell me about the stone," I said. She came forward, not all the way to the dais, but close enough to hold it out so I could see the carving clearly. I looked at it from where I sat, and my hands, resting on the carved arms of the throne, went very still. I knew the carving. I would know it in complete darkness by touch alone. It was the Veldrath mile marker glyph, the series of interlocked characters that the road workers had used for 300 years to mark the distances on the eastern trade route. I had designed the new standard myself, in my 3rd year of reign, refining the old glyph into its current form. The glyph on that stone was the old form, pre-reign. But it was not the glyph that stilled my hands. Below the glyph, in smaller characters, careful and deliberate, was a name, my name. Not the title, not the Alpha King of Veldrath, or Lord Aldrich, but the name itself, the one I had been given at birth, that only the people who had known me before the throne had known to use. The name Myra had called me. I rose from the throne. I do not rise in the throne room for anyone who has not earned the gesture. It is a deliberate rule, set in the early years, because a king who rises too easily teaches his court that he can be moved without cause. My council has seen me remain seated through the arrival of foreign princes and the petitions of high lords. Bren, who was lurking somewhere near the side archway, made a small sound of surprise. I came down from the dais and took the stone from her hands. She let me take it without flinching, which told me something. Most people, handing something they valued to a man they had never met in a throne room, would at minimum pull back slightly, an instinctive resistance. She simply opened her hands and let me have it, the way you hand something to a person who you have already decided has the right to hold it. I turned it over in my hands. The granite was cold and smooth. The carving on the back, which she had not shown me, which I had not asked to see, stopped the breath in my throat. It was a mate mark. Not the formal recording of a bond, not the court-sealed document I had filed in the Veldrath Records office on the morning after Myra and I had found each other in the old Great Hall all those years ago. Not the official inscription. The private one, the small crescent she had pressed into the soft wax of my signet seal one winter evening and laughed at because it was crooked, and I had told her that the crookedness was the point. I had kept the wax impression in the locked drawer of my writing desk for 19 years. The mark on the stone matched it, crooked in exactly the same way. I looked up from the stone. She was watching me with the patient stillness of someone who has been waiting a very long time and has decided that patience, at this point, is simply a state of being rather than an effort. I looked at her face, really looked at it, with the full attention I had been withholding since she walked in, because there is a kind of looking that a king learns to do from behind glass, and I had been doing that looking. Now I stopped doing it. She had Myra's eyes. Not similar, not the same color, not the same shape of brow. The same eyes, the precise particular quality of them, the watchfulness combined with warmth, the way they held onto a thing without being unkind about the holding. I had looked into those eyes across a great hall table on a winter night nearly 20 years ago, and the bond sense had lit up my entire chest like a lantern struck in a dark room, and I had thought, there you are. I had thought it before I knew her name. Before she had said a word to me. Simply, there you are. I thought it now. 20 years later, standing in the same great hall with a different face wearing the same eyes, and the bond sense, which had been silent for 19 years, which I had assumed was simply dead, which I had stopped expecting to feel again, said it again, quietly, in the place behind my breastbone. There you are. Not Myra. Myra was gone. I had known that for 19 years and had built my entire life around the knowing of it, the way you build a house around an absence, the empty room always at the center. But Myra's eyes, looking at me from a face I had never seen, above a name I had never heard, holding a stone that could only have come from one person's hands. I said, sit down. She sat in the carved chair beside the council table. My steward had appeared silently and arranged things, and I sat across from her and placed the stone on the table between us. Bren hovered near the doorway. I did not send him away. He had known me for 20 years, and he was not a man who repeated what he heard inside these walls. Tell me what you know, I said. She told me. She had been raised by her mother's sister, an apothecary in the eastern river town of Aldwater. A sensible woman named Pell who had taken a 3-month-old infant and the traveling pack of a dead woman, and done the best she could with both. Pell had told her very little about Myra, and nothing at all about her father, and had kept doing so until Senna was old enough to stop asking and start looking. At 17, she had found the stone in the bottom of the traveling pack, the pack that Pell had kept in a trunk in the back of the apothecary workroom, because she could not bring herself to sell it or throw it away. The stone had been wrapped in oilcloth, separately from everything else, as though it had been packed with specific intention. She had recognized the mile marker glyph from the road worker's notation. She had spent 2 years working out the full carving, cross-referencing it with the road marker records she could find in the Aldwater archives. The old glyph form placed the stone as predating my reign, which placed the road it belonged to as the eastern trade route. The name below the glyph had taken her longer because it was not a public name. She had found it, eventually, in a 20-year-old border registry document, a formal bonding record, filed in the Veldrath Capital Records office in the 3rd year of the reign, listing the Alpha King of Veldrath and the personal name by which he was registered at birth. The same name on the stone. She had begun walking 40 days ago. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I had been king long enough to know that interrupting people when they are telling you something important is the surest way to lose the parts you most need to hear. When she finished, she folded her hands on the table and waited. "You have not asked me anything," I said. "I asked you my question when I came in," she said. "You haven't answered it yet." She said it without accusation, simply as a matter of record. I looked at the stone on the table, the crooked mate mark on its back, the name carved in the old characters below the road glyph. Myra's handwriting, I would know it anywhere, the slight forward lean of it, the careful pressure of the strokes. She had carved this before she left. She had put it in the bottom of her traveling pack, wrapped in oilcloth, separately from everything else. She had done it deliberately, knowing something I had not known, that she was not coming back. And she had left it there, for the daughter she would not live to raise, so that the daughter could find her way to the one person who could answer the question. 19 years ago, Myra had sat in the apothecary's back room in Aldwater and wrapped this stone in oilcloth. 3 months after she and I had sealed our bond in the Great Hall, 6 weeks after the night she had told me quietly, in the way she told me everything directly and without fanfare, that she was carrying a child. I had not known she was gone until the next morning. She had left before dawn. She had not left a note, only, I understood now, a stone in the bottom of a traveling pack that she had known would eventually reach the right hands. I had spent 19 years not knowing why she left. It is the thing grief does that is cruelest. It does not give you the story's end. It simply stops mid-sentence and leaves you sitting with the open page. I looked at Senna across the table. "Your mother's name was Myra," I said. "She and I were fated mates. She came to Veldrath 19 years ago in the autumn, and we found each other at a council dinner that neither of us particularly wanted to attend, and by the end of the evening I would have turned the whole kingdom over to prevent her from leaving. She stayed through the winter. We sealed the bond in the old form at the Great Hall altar because she preferred the old form to the court ceremony. She was—" I stopped. Senna waited. "She was the steadiest person I had ever known," I said. "She had no interest in the throne. She had no interest in titles or ceremony or the apparatus of a king's life. She was interested in people, in the actual texture of them, what they worried about, what they needed, what made them kind or unkind. She used to walk the market roads on the mornings I was in council and come back in the evenings and tell me things about Veldrath that my entire court had failed to mention. She saw everything." I was quiet for a moment. "She left in the spring without telling me she was going," I said. "Her traveling cloak was found on the river bank. I assumed the river. I had the river searched for 2 weeks. We found nothing. I have spent 19 years not knowing." Senna's hands, folded on the table, tightened slightly. "She didn't drown," she said. "She made it to Aldwater. Pell said she was ill when she arrived, a fever from the road, something she'd picked up crossing the Veldt lowlands. She'd been traveling in bad weather. She had the baby, she had me, and the fever didn't let go." A pause. "She died 6 days after I was born." 6 days. I looked at the stone. 6 days after Senna was born, Myra had died in an apothecary in Aldwater, and the bond sense in my chest had gone silent, and I had felt it go, had felt the exact moment of it, standing at the window of my study at dawn, a pain like a stone dropping through still water, gone before I could be certain it was real. And I had told myself it was a nightmare, a flash of grief's invention, the kind of thing a bereaved man's mind creates. I had told myself that for 19 years because the alternative, that the feeling had been real, that I had felt the exact moment she died and had not known what I was feeling, was not something I could carry and continue governing a kingdom. "The stone," I said, "she packed it before she left." "She must have," Senna said. "It was in the pack with her things. Pell said she'd repacked everything before she went into labor. She'd been organized. Pell said she was very organized, right up until she couldn't be. Organized, yes, that was Myra exactly, right up until she couldn't be. She knew she wasn't going to recover, I said. It was not a question. I think so, Senna said quietly. I think she packed it so I'd have something to follow. In case I needed to find you myself. She had packed it. 3 months old in her arms and a fever taking hold, and she had packed a stone at the bottom of a traveling pack and wrapped it in oilcloth so that 19 years later her daughter would have something to follow. I had to be still for a moment. Kingship teaches you stillness, but it does not provide unlimited supply of it, and I was reaching the edge of my reserve. I said, "What did you expect when you came here?" She considered the question seriously. I could see her thinking about it, turning it over the way she had turned over the stone. "I didn't expect anything specific," she said. "I wanted an answer. I wanted to know who my father was and why my mother left, and why I didn't have the thing other people have, the story of where they come from. I didn't know if you were still, I didn't know if you'd want to know about me. I thought you might not." She paused. "I thought it was worth asking anyway." "Why?" "Because I'd walked 40 days, she said simply. "I wasn't going to stop at the door." There is a thing the bond sense does that is difficult to explain to someone who has not felt it. It does not replace reason. It does not override your capacity to think clearly about a situation, to weigh what is true against what you feel, to hold the grief and the facts in the same hands simultaneously. It simply adds a quality to the air, a certainty that sits beside everything else, quiet and absolute, the way a compass always knows north even when you cannot see the stars. It was telling me north now. I looked at Senna, at Myra's eyes in a face I was only beginning to learn the shape of, at the traveling cloak and the worn boots, and the patience of a girl who had walked 40 days and arrived in a throne room and asked her question without flinching. And the bond sense said what it had said when I was 23 years old in a great hall that smelled of candle smoke and winter, looking at a woman I had never met. "There you are." Not Myra, Myra's daughter, my daughter. The distinction mattered. I held it clearly. I was not confused about what I was feeling or why. The bond sense in the fated mate tradition runs through the bloodline. A king's mark passes in diminished form to his children, a warmth rather than the full bond, a recognition rather than a completion. I had read about it in the old records years ago and had filed it away as the kind of knowledge you accumulate about things you do not expect to use. I was using it now. The stir behind my breastbone was not the mate bond renewed. It was something quieter and, in its own way, more surprising. The simple, animal recognition of a parent for a child he has never met. I looked at her wrist. She followed my gaze and turned her hand over on the table, palm up. At the inside of her left wrist, just below the base of the hand, there was a mark faint, the color of old silver, a small crescent shape. She had probably always had it. She had probably always assumed it was simply a birthmark. It was the mate mark I had sealed with Myra, 19 years ago, in the great hall with the old altar candles and no ceremony, and Myra laughing at the crooked wax impression because the wick had guttered at the wrong moment. The mark had passed through the blood. It had not gone to a mate. It had gone, diminished and quieted, to a daughter. It was the reason the bond sense had stirred when she walked into the throne room and looked at me. It was the reason it had stirred again when she said Myra's name. It was the reason Myra had carved the stone. She had known about the passing of the mark. She had read the same old records I had, because Myra read everything, because Myra's approach to any situation was to learn everything there was to know about it before she was in it. She had known that if the child carried the mark would lead her, eventually, to someone who could feel it. She had made sure the child had a road to follow. A 40-day road. I said, "May I see your wrist?" She held it out without hesitation, and I looked at the mark more closely. Small and silver and crooked, tilted slightly to the left on the inner curve, because the wick had guttered at the wrong moment, 20 years ago, in a great hall that smelled of candle smoke in winter. I said, I know what this is. I've always had it, she said. Pell called it a birthmark. It is, I said. It is also a mate mark passed through blood, my mate mark. It went to you because you are my daughter and because the bond was sealed in the old form, which is hereditary in its minor expression. I paused. I did not know it had passed. I did not know you existed until 40 minutes ago. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the stone arches, the distant, ordinary sounds of the capital city went on: market bells, a carrier wagon on the bridge road, the thin cry of a river bird somewhere above the mist. Veldrath, going about its business, unaware that in its throne room a girl who had walked 40 days was sitting across a council table from a king who had spent 19 years not knowing the story's end. Are you, she started and stopped. Go ahead, I said. Are you certain? She said carefully. I'm not. I don't want you to feel obligated. I didn't come here to. She stopped again and looked at her hands and looked back up at me. I came for the answer. I didn't come to ask you for anything. 40 days. No pack, no seal, no letter. Her own boots and a stone in her hands and a question she was determined to ask. I am certain, I said. The mark is mine. The bond sense confirms it. Your mother's name was Myra and she was my fated mate, and she left me a stone that she knew, eventually, you would find. I paused. She knew you would find your way here. She trusted that you would. Something moved in Senna's face. A brief, controlled movement, the kind a person makes when they are determined not to let a feeling surface too visibly in a room where they have been trying to keep their dignity. I recognized it. I had been making that same movement for 19 years. I don't know what to do with that, she said quietly. Neither do I said. Not yet, but we have time to work it out. I called Bren in at that point and asked him to bring tea and then find the court historian and then not let anyone else into the throne room for the next hour. He looked at me, and at the girl across the table, and at the stone between us, with the expression of a man whose employer has, after 19 years of perfectly predictable behavior, finally done something unexpected. He managed, with considerable professionalism, to keep most of the surprise below the surface. Of course, my lord, he said and went. The historian arrived with a box of old records, the bonding documents, the mate mark registrations, the bloodline tables that the Veldrath court kept for exactly this kind of legal confirmation. He spread them on the table, and I walked him through what I needed, and he looked at Senna's wrist with the focused attention of a man who has dedicated his life to exactly this kind of question, and said, with the certainty of someone who knows what they are looking at, "It's his." Senna looked at the documents. She looked at the tables. She looked at the crooked crescent on her wrist, and at the wax impression from my own records drawer that Bren had brought at my request, the one I had kept for 19 years in the locked drawer, the only physical record of the night in the great hall. She looked at the way they matched, curve for curve, the same tilt to the left, the same guttered quality in the lower point. She looked at me. All right, she said, not overwhelmed, not undone. Simply taking it in piece by piece, the way she had been taking in the 40-day road, one step at a time, steadily, without dramatics. So much like her mother. There will be court requirements, I said. A formal recognition filed with the records office. A bloodline confirmation which the historian can administer today if you're willing. Once the records are filed, the title is as it is. I will not push it on you faster than you want it. She looked at me for a long moment. What is the title? Daughter of the Alpha King of Veldrath, I said. Heiress of the bonded line. If you choose to claim it. And if I don't, then you walk out of here today with your answer, I said. And you know who your father was, and you know what happened to your mother, and the rest is yours to decide. She was quiet. I've been thinking about this for 2 years, she said at last. I thought about it for every one of the 40 days. I thought about what I wanted. I thought about what I'd say when I got here. I thought about all the ways it might go. She paused. I didn't think about what I'd do after I got my answer. I was so focused on getting to the question. That is understandable, I said. Take the time you need. She shook her head slightly. I don't think I need time, she said. I think I need, she stopped. I think I've been on the road for so long that I don't know what it looks like to stop. I don't know what staying somewhere looks like. It looks like this, I said. Like a room with walls in it, like meals at a regular hour, like knowing which road you are on because you have been on it long enough to know its name. She looked at the stone on the table, then at the documents, then at me. She trusted that I'd find my way here, she said. She did. She was right. She was usually right, I said, about most things. Something shifted in Senna's face, not the controlled movement from before, but something quieter and warmer, a private warmth like candlelight on stone. Tell me about her, she said. I told her. I had not told anyone about Myra in 19 years. I had not spoken of her in the court, not because it was forbidden, but because the court had understood, in the way courts understand things without being told, that it was not a subject their king would welcome. Bren knew most of it from proximity, from the 20 years of working close to a man whose grief was always visible even when it was controlled. The historian knew the documents. No one knew Myra. I told Senna. The market roads in the mornings. The way she had of listening to people, not waiting for them to finish so she could respond, but actually listening, so that by the time she replied you understood that she had heard the thing underneath the thing you had said, the worry inside the question. The winter evening with the guttered wick and the crooked mark and her laughing, and saying that the crookedness was clearly a sign from the moon that she was the Alpha King's mate, because no one else would have the patience for him. The way she had told me about the child, directly and without fanfare, because Myra's approach to important things was directness and without fanfare. The way she had looked in the weeks that followed, when the spring was beginning to come in through the windows and the market roads were warming up, and she was talking about the summer as if we had all of it ahead of us. The morning I had found her cloak on the river bank and understood, in some part of myself that I had refused to acknowledge for 19 years, that the story was not going to continue the way I had thought. Senna listened. She listened the way Myra had listened, not waiting, but actually taking it in, letting it settle into the space it needed. Her eyes, which were Myra's eyes, stayed steady and warm throughout. She did not cry. She came once very close to it when I described the crooked mark and the guttered wick and Myra laughing, but she held it composed, the way her mother had always held things. She sounds, Senna said when I finished and stopped. She was, I said. She was going to come back, Senna said. Pell told me, she told me before she died that she was going to be well enough to make the road in the summer, once I was strong enough to travel. She was going to come back. She meant to. The river, the fever from the Veldt lowlands, the 6 days. She had meant to. I looked at the stone on the table. The mile marker glyph, the name, the crooked crescent on the back. She had packed it as a precaution, the way careful people pack precautions, not because they expect to need them, but because they know the road. She had packed it in case she did not make it back, and she had packed it with enough information to lead a determined girl to the one place where the rest of the story lived. She had trusted her daughter to find the road. Her daughter had. The court historian completed the bloodline confirmation before the afternoon bells. It was a simple test, the old blood sense protocol, requiring only a drop of blood from each party, and the use of the bond stone that the Veldrath line had kept in the records vault for 300 years. The bond stone was a piece of old gray river granite, not unlike the stone Senna had carried in from the road, and it glowed faintly gold when it confirmed a blood connection within the bonded line. It glowed for Senna. The historian wrote the confirmation in the records ledger in his careful, unhurried hand, and dated it, and sealed it with the court seal, and looked up at me with the expression of a man who has just had the privilege of witnessing something he will describe to his grandchildren. Bren, who had been managing the door with his customary tact, and had successfully prevented 3 separate council members from entering the throne room on the pretext of urgent business, came back in when the historian had gone and looked at the ledger entry and then at me and said, simply, "I am very glad, my lord." Which was the most Bren had said about my personal life in 20 years of service, and which told me exactly what he thought of it. Senna looked at the ledger entry, her name in the historian's careful script beside the bonded line of Veldrath beside my name. Below it, the bloodline confirmation, the bondstone reading the date. "It's real," she said. "Yes," I said. "I've been thinking about the answer for 2 years," she said slowly. "I forgot to think about what I'd do when it turned out to be yes." "What would you have done if it turned out to be no?" She considered this, walked back, I suppose, asked Pell if she knew anything else, a pause, found another road. That was, I thought, entirely correct. She would have found another road. She was her mother's daughter. "The title does not require you to stay in Veldrath," I said. "It does not require you to be here to take up a formal role to be involved in the court's workings. It is simply what you are, what you have always been. The records now reflect it. What you do with the fact of it is yours." "What would you like me to do with it?" she said. No one had asked me that in 19 years, what I would like. Not what the court required, not what the records reflected, not what the bond since confirmed. What I would like. I looked at Myra's eyes in Senna's face, and at the worn boots, and at the stone on the table between us, the 40-day road distilled to a piece of river granite and a name and a crooked crescent. "I would like," I said carefully, "to know your name when you walk into a room. I would like to know what road you are on. I would like to hear about what you found in 40 days of walking and what Aldwater was like and what Pell is like and what you noticed about the road from the eastern provinces, what your mother might have noticed, walking that road the other direction 20 years ago." I paused. I would like to not spend another 19 years not knowing the rest of the story. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The road from the eastern provinces, from Aldwater to here, crosses 11 bridges and goes through 4 market towns and 1 city, and the 3rd bridge out of the Veldt lowlands has a hairline crack in the eastern pier that whoever maintains the road should probably look at." It took me a moment. "The eastern pier," I said. "The 3rd bridge," she said. "I noticed it on the 22nd day. Someone should send an inspector." I looked at her. "Your mother," I said, "used to walk the market roads in the mornings and come back in the evenings and tell me things about Veldrath that my entire court had failed to mention." "She sounds sensible," Senna said. "She was," I said. "You are very like her." The afternoon light was coming through the high windows now, the thin gold of a Veldrath spring afternoon, and it fell across the council table and the stone and the ledger in Senna's face, and made the room, for the first time in a very long time, feel occupied in the way a room feels occupied when the right person is in it. I thought of Myra in the great hall 20 years ago in the winter candle smoke, saying, "There you are," because she had said it first. I had always neglected to mention that in the versions I told myself that she had said it first, looked across the great hall table and said it plainly, as she did most things, because Myra's approach to important things was directness and without fanfare. There you are. 19 years and 40 days later. A girl who had walked a long road and arrived without a letter and stood in the silence of the throne room and asked her question without flinching. There you were all along. The council meeting I had canceled reconvened the following morning. I had sent word the previous evening that the business of the day was postponed, and that there was a matter of the bonded line to be addressed, and that the historian would present the relevant documents. The council members, 7 of them, all men and women who had served Veldrath through the 19 years of my solo reign, who had sat through councils where I had been efficient and controlled, and had given nothing away about anything personal, arrived with the expression of people who had heard a thing was coming without knowing what the thing was. I introduced Senna. She stood beside the council table in a clean traveling cloak. Bren had arranged guest quarters and a change of clothes with his usual efficiency, and looked at the 7 council members with the same direct steadiness with which she had looked at me. The historian presented the documents: the bond stone confirmation, the ledger entry, the bloodline table. There was a silence in the council room, the particular kind of silence that settles when people are absorbing something that rearranges their understanding of a situation they thought they had mapped completely. My council steward, a woman named Osrit who had served Veldrath for 30 years and who I had always considered the most perceptive person in the building, looked at Senna's face, looked at it the way I had looked at it, with the focused attention of someone who sees the thing beneath the thing, and then looked at me, and said nothing at all, but her expression did something quiet and warm that I had not seen on her face in a very long time. The eldest of the council members, a man named Torven who had been with my father before me and who prided himself on never being surprised, said, "Well," and then was quiet for a long moment. "Well," he said again. "There will be formal public recognition," I said. "The process will take a week, the records office, the court herald, the standard announcements. In the meantime, Senna is a guest of the court and is to be accorded accordingly." Torven looked at Senna. "Where have you been?" he said, which was the kind of question that sounds simple and isn't. "Aldwater," Senna said. "Eastern provinces. I've been there most of my life." "And before that?" "The road," she said simply. Torven was quiet. Then he said to me, "She speaks plainly." "Yes," I said. "She does." He looked at her for another moment, this old man who had been surprised exactly once in 30 years of council service by a girl who had walked 40 days and arrived with a stone and a question. "Good," he said. "We have enough people in this court who don't." The formal recognition was held at the end of the week, in the great hall, with the old candles lit the way they had been lit 20 years ago on a winter night, because that was the Veldrath custom, for occasions that belonged to the bonded line. I stood at the hall altar, and the historian read the documents, and the court assembled in the tiered gallery above and the floor below, and Senna stood beside me in a dress Bren had arranged from the court wardrobe, a deep blue, the Veldrath color, properly fitted, looking nothing like the traveling cloak and worn boots she had arrived in, and yet entirely like herself, because Senna was the kind of person who was essentially themselves regardless of the clothing. She looked at the candles on the altar and then at me and said quietly, "She would have liked this." "She would have said the ceremony was excessive," I said, equally quietly. "And then she would have looked at the candles and liked it anyway." "And then she would have looked at the candles and liked it anyway." The historian read the confirmation. The council witnessed it. The court herald announced it. The gathering in the great hall, which was most of the capital's senior population, because courts do not successfully keep secrets for a week, and everyone had heard something, was very quiet in the way that large groups of people are very quiet when they are absorbing information they did not expect. Then they were not quiet anymore. I will not pretend that there were no complications in the weeks that followed. There were. The questions of title and precedence and succession, and the legal architecture of a daughter of the bonded line who had appeared 19 years after the fact. These were not simple questions, and they required the council and the records office and the court historian considerable time and considerable paper. Senna participated in these discussions with the same direct steadiness with which she had walked into the throne room, and frequently noticed things that the council members had not, and on one occasion pointed out a flaw in the succession table that the historian had been working with for 20 years. He was not offended. He thanked her. She asked in the 3rd week, whether she might take the morning road through the capital market district and come back in the evening. I told her to go. She came back in the evening with a list of things she had noticed: a market family whose stall permit was being blocked by an outdated ordinance, a water channel on the eastern road that was silting up, the hairline crack on the third bridge's eastern pier that she had already mentioned, which she noted had not yet been addressed. She presented the list to Bren, who looked at it with the expression of a man who has been adequately replaced. She walked the market road every morning. She noticed things. She came back in the evenings and told me. I had spent 19 years not knowing the rest of the story. I had governed Veldrath and held councils and signed trade agreements and inspected the river bridges twice a year. And I had done all of it from behind the glass that grief teaches a man to put between himself and the world, because the world without Myra in it had a quality of flatness that the glass made more bearable. The glass, I found, had quietly come down. I could not have said exactly when. Sometime between the morning a girl arrived at my gate with a stone and a question, and the evening she came back from the market road with a list of things the court had failed to notice. Somewhere in the 40 days of walking she had already done, and the road she had yet to find her way around, and the way she looked at the candles on the hall altar on the night of the recognition, the candlelight on her face, and Myra's eyes looking at me, and the thing behind my breastbone that was not the mate bond and was not grief, and was something quieter and more lasting than either. The bond sense had been silent for 19 years. It was not silent now. Not the mate bond that was Myra's, and Myra was gone, and some things do not come back and should not be asked to. But the thing the blood passes to a daughter, the quiet warmth, the recognition that says there you are in a different key, in a different register, the key in which a father recognizes a child he has never met, that was present and steady, and lit the room in the way a lamp in a window lights a room, not spectacularly, not dramatically, but with the kind of constancy that makes everything in it simply more visible. She had walked 40 days with a stone and a question. I had spent 19 years with the open page. The story did not end the way I had thought a story ended. Myra had not come back. She was not coming back. The story had not continued the way I had expected. It had gone in a direction I had not known to look for, through an apothecary in Aldwater and a trunk in a back workroom, and a piece of river granite in oilcloth at the bottom of a traveling pack. It had gone where Myra had trusted it to go, which was where the road went, which was 40 days east and then 40 days back, along the trade route, past 11 bridges and 4 market towns and 1 hairline crack in the eastern pier of the third bridge that someone should have caught 20 years ago. The story, it turned out, had not ended. It had simply taken a road I had not known to watch for. I watched for it now. Every morning she went out onto the market road. Every evening she came back. And I found that the finding of her, again and again at the end of each day, was the thing I had not known I was waiting for, not spectacularly, not dramatically, but with the kind of constancy that makes a man understand without being told that he has stopped merely governing a kingdom he has no particular reason to govern, and started again, having a reason. She came through the door one evening and set her list on the table and looked at me and said, "The market family with the blocked permit, it's sorted. Bren found the ordinance and there's a provision for appeals." A pause. I also spoke to the woman who runs the East Side bread stall. She wanted to ask about the grain pricing from the northern contracts. I told her I didn't know yet, but I'd find out. I hoped that was all right. "That was perfectly all right," I said. She nodded, satisfied. Myra had come into a great hall 20 years ago and looked at me across a table and said there, "You are," before she knew my name, because Myra's approach to important things was directness and without fanfare. Her daughter came through a door in the evening with a list of things the court had failed to notice and set it on the table and looked at me and said, "I told her I'd find out." There she was. The page was no longer open.